I will be responding to the claim that hospital food service does not promote safe dietary habits to a patient's recovery. The advocate offers three secondary claims to this. The first one being the reinforcement of poor eating habits will put patients at increased risk for developing diseases. The second one being the limitations of staff and funding is considerably detrimental in providing patients a nutritionally balanced meal. And thirdly, hospital foods often include a mix of processed foods that are harmful to patients. For the secondary claim one, he has no reasoning for it. It's just there. He talks to dietitians and their meal plans, and this provides no support to the claim. It comes out as another proposition rather than a secondary claim. And the evidence provided does not help the claim either. It's just a quote stating that eating habits are considered by the nurses when tending to the patients. It poses no correlation or assistance. According to an article produced in 2014 by U.S. News and World Report, a leading provider of service news and information, hospitals allow patients to have food brought to them by someone outside the hospital, which means they don't need to eat the standardized hospital food, and this also provides for better habits. And now for response to the secondary claim 2. His reasoning is that this limited source of income for the hospitals makes them utilize ready-to-serve meals like tea dinner, which contains processed food. The evidence that backs this reasoning is faulty. The example provided states that a food service team relies on pre-diced produce, prepared desserts, and frozen dinner meals to compensate for the lack of food service faculty members. But in reality, frozen dinner meals was never actually mentioned in the source. The article actually says other ready-made items. So the evidence for this claim is distorted. And the counterclaim to this is that the limitations of staff and funding are actually disappearing. According to the Institute of Food Technologists, a nonprofit scientific society of professionals engaged in food science and food technology, explains that hospitals are actually creating initiatives in which they offer healthier food choices. And this supports the limitations of staff and funding disappearing. In my secondary claim, in response to secondary claim 3, his reasoning is that since processed meats are carcinogenic, that means that they are bad to keep serving in hospitals, as well as other processed food. This is faulty reasoning due to the fact that in his evidence he only provides information on processed meat and not other processed foods, and he uses this as the basis for all the processed foods. And this is based on that assumption. According to the U.S. News and World Report's hospitals, according to U.S. News and World Report, hospitals are offering healthier options for patients because of demand of better choices in menu, and the solutions are hospitals have been looking towards local produce. In conclusion, I believe the claim presented by the advocate to be false due to faulty evidence and reasoning. Hospital food service continues to grow to promote safe dietary habits. Thank you.
All right, the structural stuff is fine. On the first point, you challenged the lack of reasoning, or what you say is a lack of reasoning, and you say it's just there with no support, and you kind of suggested it's a separate proposition. I don't think you've explained clearly why you see it as a separate proposition. How is it unrelated to the main point, or if it requires additional proof that is not present then I think maybe you can make the argument about that. This is the first place that you cite a piece of information from U.S. News. So you found an article that applies to this that had some information in it. The notion that hospitals allow outside food. So what does that mean? That means that the patients are not dependent on the hospital for their nutritional requirements. That's what the claim should be. You're trying to let the evidence make the claim for you. The evidence is supposed to support your claim, not make the claim for you. So make sure that you give us a declarative statement about what it is you think this evidence means so that we can follow your argument. On the second point, there's a little bit of a picayune sort of argument that the evidence doesn't really mention frozen foods. It just refers to other ready-made items. I don't know that frozen foods would be excluded from that. I'm not sure how important that is, and even if it is true, what does that get you in the long run? I'm not sure that it advances a position that suggests that the food products that people have in their hospitals are healthy and nutritious. The better argument that you have is a counterclaim that comes at the end. And again, this is one of those things where you're reading evidence and you're providing us with information, but you're not making the claim. The claim is that hospitals are in fact trying to be more aware of health issues. And here's a study that mentions a bunch of hospitals that are doing that kind of thing. So whenever there's a piece of information, look at that piece of information and ask yourself, what is the conclusion I want people to draw from this? Not just, I've got a piece of information, let me plug it in here, but what is the conclusion that people should draw from this, and how does that conclusion apply to the argument that was being presented by the advocate? I think that was missing in a couple of these spots earlier. And then the notion that the processed foods are carcinogenic, I mean, you basically grant that. I think that could be challenged. The degree of risk, I think, is also relatively low. You basically just suggest that there are other kinds of food processes or processed food that's offered. It's not just meat. I'm going, well, that makes me really happy, so I'm going to get processed food that has some other kinds of issue. I think your argument here is that they're equivocating all processed foods with the meats which potentially have problems, but that because they're treating them as if they're the same, they're ignoring that these other kinds of foods are available and that they are relatively safe. And I think that's one of the things that you then try to follow up on with the third piece of information that you've got from that one article that talks about what the healthy options are. I think that's another good point that gets you a little bit of ground. All right, thank you.